in Massachusetts and walked away with 3 suspects in conjunction with the Times Square bombing plot, the attempted blowing up of a vehicle bomb in Times Square. What you will not see, hear, or read in the mainstream media is the analysis from our Homeland Security correspondent, Gary Moskowitz, who talks in very good detail, great detail, about the funding of these terrorist organizations, because as it so happens, the 3 people who have been nabbed, federal sources tell us, were cash couriers, the people helping to fund the operation. And as Moskowitz points out, these guys on their own don't have the resources to do these kinds of things. I mean, if you look at the house, I don't know if any of you have seen any video of the house of the guy who was nabbed for the Times Square bombing plot, but it's not what you would call a very affluent neighborhood or a very well-preserved domicile. So obviously this is not a person who has unlimited resources to do what he attempted to do a couple of weekends ago here in New York City. And what Moskowitz has been saying, and he's always ahead of the curve on these issues, for over a decade now, is that you have to go after the funding. And in this case, the FBI did not stop their investigation with the arrest of the alleged perpetrator, but they went after the people here, and there are efforts, I trust, to go after the people abroad who were involved in the plot to get them. And in the case of the 3 that were arrested today, it had to do with the money, the very thing that Moskowitz has been talking about for so many years. And he points out in the article on the Paltalk News Network site that if you go after organizations that are laundering money to terrorist groups civilly, there is a thing in the law called discovery. If I sue you, then I have the right via discovery of all of your documents relating to the suit. So if the government goes after them civilly for allegedly funding terrorist organizations, and through discovery, they can procure information that might help them to go after individuals criminally as well in the future. So it's a tool to go after them. It also stops the funding, at least for the moment, which would be a very good thing. Now, there's another story that broke today, too. And when you juxtapose these 2 stories, it's beyond the pale, ladies and gentlemen. Because the Department of Homeland Security has, in its infinite wisdom, decided to cut funding to New York City. Now, nobody has to be an expert in counterterrorism to realize that New York City, like Washington, D.C., remain the prime targets of terrorists, at least here in the United States. And yet Homeland Security cuts funding to New York City. You know where they increase funding? Wyoming. Well, all that free-range cattle, you got to protect them against car bombs, I guess. It doesn't make sense to me, not in the least. So I want to know what you guys think about all of this. And I will add one other thing that Gary Moskowitz, our Homeland Security correspondent, points out in the article at paltalknewsnetwork.com, which is very interesting. And he says, the FBI is on the case. They deserve all the credit for what they are doing. They're taking this very seriously. And a lot of people don't know, but to become an FBI agent, you have to have pre-skills. Like you have to be an attorney or an accountant. And in the case of the funding of terrorism, that is a very important skill in law enforcement. But he says we have to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to going after the funding of these terrorist organizations. You know, many times people will innocently pass the hat or pass the jug around and ask you to put money in to support some charitable organization that ostensibly is providing assistance to people in war-torn parts of the world, and whose heart does not go out for refugees wherever they happen to be, whether they be Afghan refugees or Sudanese refugees or Palestinian refugees. And unbeknownst to the donor, many times when they put that money in, it's really not going to help those refugees. It's going to arm terrorists. These are the kinds of organizations that need to be stopped. And Moskowitz is 100% right, in my opinion, about that. We have to become very proactive when it comes to this kind of thing. The issue of terrorism is no longer something that we look at through the prism of cable television. Oh, that's happening over there. It is happening here in the United States. It is happening here in the United Kingdom. It is happening here in Spain. It is happening here in Bali. It is happening here in Israel. It is happening here all over the world. And we have to unite ourselves as a human race and stand shoulder to shoulder and use whatever tools that we have to try to mitigate this threat. Let's go to Jim in Detroit. Jim, welcome to News Talk Online on the Pal Talk News Network. How you feeling, buddy? We've been missing you. I know you had some surgery, and we haven't seen you in a while. I trust you are on the mend.
Well, you're right, Gary. I am on the mend, and thank you for your concern. And I still take pills daily and see doctors, and hopefully that this is the right one, that the hernia will completely be the final answer, and I'll stay out of the hospital for a while. Diversifying briefly from your topic, the big tragedy here in the Detroit area was the passing of Ernie Harwell, and a real fine tribute was paid to him. He truly was a gentleman, from the word personified. And don't know if you've ever had in your broadcast experience in Michigan any contact with Ernie. I did, and will always remember him as the best of a gentleman I could find. Now I'll get to the immediate topic of today's program, in which the terrorists who can strike in New York, and New York still seems to be a prime target because that's where it all started and brought us into this 9/11 situation. Yet I wonder if we are not going to change our ways in which we control things. For example, there's many opposition to the both side views in Arizona as to why the state has adopted its own ruling on controlling immigrants. When law gets out of hand and the federal government wasn't doing something, I feel they had to do something. I don't think this is racial